didn't know that he had a heroin addiction. Thought like, okay, I could help him. I could change him. And I gave in and I said, oh, like, let me just try one time. Things got bad really quick. I would get out of jail and in less than 24 hours, I would be back in jail. And I became this person that I never thought I would. And like my son was like, I'm hungry. And he stayed by the door so long, he fell asleep. Wow, like this is an all-time low. So I got feeling and I dug in a little bit more. I almost died. I was in the hospital for a month and a half.
Imagine dealing with so much dysfunction and abuse as a child that it leads you to choose to deal with hardcore drugs by the age of 14, battling addiction, depression, and even jail time. Our guest today is a woman that faced her challenges head on and emerged stronger than ever. Now as a thriving graduate student with a GPA of 4.0, let me add, a professional, a parent, someone who gives back to her community. She's here to share her story of resilience. It's an inspiring story that really motivates us to grow through what we go through. Welcome to the Raw Success Podcast, Christina.
Thank you.
Peace, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you for being generous with your time and your story.
Of course.
So tell us about your upbringing and how you grew up. I know one thing that stands out for me is that you're Puerto Rican and Korean.
Yes.
Very unique blend.
Yeah. So my dad's Puerto Rican, my mother's Korean, and he was in the military. So he was stationed in Korea and they met, and then they had my sister, my brother, and me, and got married and everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about where you grew up and.
So I grew up in East Brunswick. My parents had a store in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, that we used to, like I was there very often. We stayed in East Brunswick, we rented. It always felt like I was in the wrong area, you know what I mean? Because like everybody else, it predominantly like fairly wealthy. It was a little like, I will say that in the school system, I didn't really felt like I didn't feel like I fit in totally because I wasn't necessarily one race or another, right? Mm-hmm. So even within the family too, like I was never totally one side or never totally the other side. So I just kind of felt like in the middle or like almost nowhere, I went to a Catholic school in the beginning and then my parents transferred me, I want to say, 6th grade. And it was totally different for me. But I have to say this, it doesn't matter what school I was at. I never totally felt like I fit in. It was, even going from Catholic school to public school was a huge change for me. I think that is my starting point, right? Of like when things kind of started changing for me. Even though like, I had went through sexual abuse as a child but I hadn't spoken to anybody about it, right? I hadn't opened up about it. And I believe that like around 6th grade, I want to say was like when it started really bothering me. And eventually, like by 8th grade, I told the guidance counselor, and nothing was really done about it. You know what I mean? But it wasn't like I was necessarily looking for anything to be done, but I just like wanted it to be known. Like I wanted to get it off my chest because I felt like I was holding it for a long time.
What was it about 6th grade that was like a triggering point for you?
I mean, it could have been just, getting older, right? Like going into teenage years. I'm not sure, but I remember, I had explained that in 8th grade was when I said something. And it was that same year, I remember, it's strange because I remember it like vividly, what I was wearing, everything. When my depression kicked in. I was really, really depressed. I didn't I felt like I didn't care if I was alive or not. And it's just weird how like I kind of like remember that moment of when it happened, like when it started, when it was really bad. And I think it was so bad because it was never acknowledged, right? Like even though like I said something, it was still like just swept under the rug, more or less. So yeah, and then I went into high school. In the beginning of high school, I started experimenting with marijuana, drinking. It was all fun and games, hiding, doing all that. And I think I enjoyed somewhat of the thrill of getting away with, like if we snuck out and then we made it back okay, it was like, oh yeah, that was fun, because we didn't get caught. So that's an aspect too, right? Like this like adrenaline rush that sometimes I'll seek. I don't even realize it. But so yeah, I was smoking marijuana, drinking. We kind of got in trouble when we were younger, but it wasn't like it basically it got so much worse. So so what I thought, getting in trouble, that was bad. No, that was nothing in comparison to what was going to happen in the future. And by 15, I tried cocaine. And it was kind of weird because I was like in and out of drinking, smoking marijuana, and I wasn't totally doing drugs every single day. And then, I did well in school too. It wasn't like I wasn't able to perform in that sense.
And at 15, so I'm going back when I was 15. Definitely was exposed to weed, drinks, and I was already hustling by then. I was already selling. I was never introduced to the idea of using cocaine at 15 years old. Like it wasn't even like nowhere, nobody, How was it introduced to you? Like how did you even become exposed to it as a 15-year-old young girl?
So that's a random story how it happened. I didn't even know when I was 14, 15, I was around heroin and cocaine. I had no idea that the people that I was hanging out with, that they were using it. But when I was 15, I used to work, I had this job, and there was a lady that worked with me, and she rented like a basement apartment around the corner from my house. And she was a heroin addict, and she also did cocaine. And when I knew her from working with her, and she used to just like ask me, oh, like if you want to come over, hang out, smoke weed, right? I did that, and then she offered cocaine to me. So I tried it. And I tried it that one time, but I didn't do it again until like I met my son's father. And I didn't know that he had a heroin addiction. When I met him, he would just have me drive him to like Elizabeth or Newark. And I started to think like, okay, something is going on, because what he was doing with, he was kind of like calling out to people, and then they were coming up to the car. So I was like, oh, like and then, I was like questioning it. And then he said, oh, I'm addicted to heroin. And he was sniffing heroin, and that did not scare me or push me away to where I think some people would have been like, yeah, okay, I'm going to part ways, right? But for me, it was almost like this like savior complex kind of that I had. I thought like, okay, I could help him. I could change him. And it worked in the beginning for like maybe the first couple months, right? But then eventually he went back, and they would always, him and his friends would get high in front of me, and I never used. And eventually, right, being exposed to it so much, and with my background of not wanting to always be, in my own skin, right? Like, it got the best of me, and I gave in, and I said, oh, like let me just try one time. and I tried it, and my life, like, it wasn't even like it went downhill, gradually. I ran with that, I wanted to chase that feeling of, it just always feels like everything's going to be okay. Things got bad really quick. I want to say that I started using heroin when I was 18, and by 19, I was like arrested using intravenously, and just on the streets, always on the run, because there was always warrants out for my arrest, and it was just crazy.
Where were your parents at during that time? How were you able to hide it from them, or do you think that they knew?
They knew that I was doing some type of drugs. They knew marijuana, right? They knew about the drinking. They didn't know necessarily about cocaine, definitely not heroin.
Yeah.
And how they found out, I got arrested. And they, the cops found heroin on me. They found a syringe, and then they called my dad, and my dad had to come down to the police station, and that was when they said, "Oh, your daughter's using drugs, right, intravenously." So he was really shocked. But during that time, my parents were going through their own issues together. They were kind of like almost about to separate. So it was easy to go under the radar and not really be noticed.
Really?
And it continued. I was in jail by the time I was in and out, but then I had to, I went into jail for like a year when I was maybe 21, I want to say. And nothing would stop me. Right? So the first time I remember the first time I got arrested, I was put in central booking, New York, right? It's not a pleasant place.
It's jungle.
It's a jungle, right? And you would have thought that would have kind of set me to the point where I'm like, yeah, maybe I don't want to do this, but it was not the case. I got out and I was like, let's go back. So I didn't have, the problem really with that was that I didn't fear being in high crime areas, let's say, and I didn't fear just continuously chasing the drug. It was something that I was willing to do no matter what.
You definitely don't look like I'm listening to you, and I know you, and I know your story's real, and it's crazy to me because you don't even look like that type of person. And I think that's an issue. I'll tell you a quick story. So I'm an X-ray tech. It's one of the things that I do. And there's I don't want to say the name. There's a place that I serviced that was primarily for people with mental health issues, drug addiction, and whatnot in Union County. And one of the things that really shocked me, it almost brought me to tears. And I'll tell you why. It's because when I went in there, I realized that there weren't that many people that looked like me. And the reason that brought me to tears is because as someone who's conscious, who knows what's up, right? I realized that I too was programmed with the agenda of the stereotype of what a drug addict looks like. And I, even as a conscious Black man, expected to go in there and see a whole bunch of people that look like me. And it was the opposite. It was actually a very small percentage. Like I might have seen maybe 4 in that whole building, right? And I was just like, wow, what the? I was so shocked. And I realized like, oh, they're just not showing this in the news. They're just, and these people are good at keeping their business to themselves. What do you think about that?
I agree. It's easy. You would think it's not easy to hide, but you can.
Yeah.
If you just keep up appearances for the most part, You can hide it. Eventually, though, it catches up to you. It's
So, with you saying that, and you as a parent now, is there signs that you think were out there, or that you can maybe tell to some parents that might think something's going on but doesn't know? Are there certain things in hindsight, that showed something's going on?
I would say yes, and part of that would be, where you see your child starting to isolate, starting to go out more, often, right? All different hours, which can be tricky because sometimes you could just think that they're out hanging out with friends. But when it starts to become, a thing where there was times where my parents were like, no, you can't go out. And I was like, I'm going out because I had to go get the drug. So when you start to see, right, that pushback where no matter what, that you have to be out, and that those are signs.
One of the times I was arrested, I was in a complex in Patterson, and I was in a cell with an heroin addict. Mm-hmm. And, I sold crack and I sold weed. And my block in particular is not really like a block that's known for heroin. Mm-hmm. So but this one time I was in a cell with a heroin addict, and man, he was going through withdrawals. He was on the floor in the fetal position. Mm-hmm. He defecated on himself. Mm-hmm. He vomited on himself. It was, forgive me for sounding insensitive, but the craziest thing that one of the craziest things that I've seen in my life to this day. Mm-hmm. Did you ever have like withdrawals that were that strong?
It's funny that you say that story because there were a couple times where in Newark I was arrested, and at that time they had cells, and it was called Green Street.
The Green Monster in Newark, yeah.
They put like 7 people in a cell, and they'd all be going through what you were just talking about. And I went through, of course, like not to that extreme, and I did go through, a strong amount of withdrawal, but I wouldn't say that. I was like throwing up, stuff like that, but it never got that bad.
In this day and time, right, where mental health is a big thing, mm-hmm. right, in comparison to our generation, what's your view on that, right? And also, do you think that some people, I don't know if abuse is the wrong word, but I'm just going to use the word abuse the whole mental health thing, because it sounds like at the age of 13, you were really going through some mental health issues for real, right? So what's your take on that?
So, it's interesting, right? Because at 13, I went through that. I didn't know what I was going through. I didn't know that until I'd say fairly recently. When I was thinking about it, I said, wow, I remember that moment, right? And it is, mental health, right? Sometimes that's kind of the sad part about it, because it can be abused or used more or less as a reason why, people are using. But the reality is that, I think it's like over 80% of people with substance use disorder, they have co-occurring disorders, whether it be alongside generalized anxiety, major depressive, bipolar. It's very frequent. And it's not shocking, because if they're going through that, they will want to figure out a way to numb it.
One of the things that I appreciate about you, you want people to know that it was a choice. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, I really respect that about you. Can you speak on that?
Yes. So I acknowledge the fact that I have been through different trauma in my life, but I also acknowledge the fact that other people have been through similar traumas, right? And they didn't go out and use. And each person's different, but ultimately it was always my choice.
Yeah, my book is called The Power of Choice, so really stood out to me for that. If I ever do a part 2, I definitely have to include you as part of one of the chapters.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to go back to your story. You ended off that, you're around the age 18. You just met well, not just met, but you were introduced to heroin. What,
So it was in and out of jail. I would get out of jail, and in less than 24 hours, I would be back in jail. And people wouldn't even realize that I left because I'd be back that quick.
How did you get out so quick?
It's normally, if it's like a municipal charge, you can get ROR. At that time, they had that. They don't have that anymore, I don't think. But it was different. This is back in the, I want to say, early 2000s.
What's the craziest experience? Of course, this is your personal story, right? So you share what you want to share. What's the craziest, scariest thing that you've experienced or saw in jail?
There was a lady that hung herself when I was when I was in jail, and I remember I spoke to her, and maybe an hour later, she died.
within that conversation, did it seem as if something was going on that, if you remember, or?
She was trying to get bailed out, and she was going through withdrawal.
Withdrawal, yeah.
She was going through withdrawal, and I was able to understand the system fairly well, right? So in jail, I was okay for the most part, but some people weren't, right? Some people, they would go into jail and they just they can't acclimate, whatever you want to call it, and it's almost like they get in their own way. Because though jail is, nobody wants to be there, you can either make it hard or you can make it a little bit easier.
How did you have that natural? I mean, you graduated again. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
You graduated with a 4.0 GPA, which is no joke.
Thank
and
you.
we'll definitely talk more about that. So you're obviously smart, and you seem to have a street smart about you. But you're from the suburbs. So how did you develop that natural ability to adjust and just be in tune and just know how to get around?
So as a child, I had, even though I had explained that I lived in East Brunswick, I felt like most of my time was not spent in East Brunswick, besides maybe going to school. Outside of that, a lot of my family, I had family that lived in Perth Amboy, Elizabeth, the Bronx. So, we would go out and visit them. And it was just, it was normal to me. But, there was a part of me that, and I don't really know what it was, I didn't have that fear. And that kept me using for a very long time.
Were you always like that? Is this a child, just like a fearless child, gangster about it?
No, it's I was timid, right? So it wasn't like that, the way that how I ended up being, as I was using, right? You would have never thought that, because I was pretty shy. And I would say I am even now, right? So that is, the genuine me, right? Because there's a point where when you're using drugs, you don't even know who you are anymore, right? So it was just bizarre. It was scary, and I put myself in plenty of situations where I could have been harmed.
It almost sounds, and I'm not like a psychologist, doctor or nothing, but it almost sounds like you had an alter ego.
Yeah.
Does that sound? Wow. And I know when you were a child, you mentioned dysfunction. And so this podcast is about success and also looking at the formula to success, and also seeing the failures, learning from the failures as well. What are some of those dysfunctions that you experienced that started to lead you on the path
There was a lot of domestic violence from when I was very young, that I had experienced that, and just different situations that were pretty graphic and that I had seen between my mother and my father. I went through that, and culturally, right? We were taught that you don't talk about things that are happening within the house, right? And you don't talk to the police. That's for sure. That's a guarantee. And I was raised that way, where you don't speak, you don't talk, you just kind of stay under the radar. And it's not to say, my parents, my father was in the military 20 years. He was awarded the Silver Star. He was by all means a hero, within the military. And my mother, she just, she worked hard. She went to school. She tried to do anything that she could, right? But even in those circumstances, we make those mistakes as parents. We don't necessarily want to, but it still happens, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. And I understand that. So I don't put blame on what I went through. I don't put blame on any of that, because there's a part of me that knows what my parents went through as a child and how that has affected them. Because my father lost both of his parents by the time he was, I think, 11. So, he was basically an orphan. And my mother, she didn't really have her father in her life. So there were a lot of different, with their history, that I knew that it shaped who they were and what they were able to do and not able to do, or cope with and not cope with, right?
Yeah, I came to the point in my life as well where I saw my parents as humans, and recognized that we're all striving to do our best.
Yeah.
Even though it may not be the best. It's like you're just, today's Malcolm X Born Day, he talks about like the hate that hate produced. Just that cycle that happens to all of us. One thing that I observe, right, from just being around drugs myself and stuff like that, there seems to be like this, I don't know if the word is pattern, but I've just ran into a lot of women who've used drugs before and were introduced by a boyfriend. It seems like a man, it seems like that seems to be like, I personally haven't met anyone who said like, well, a man that said, yeah, my girl put me on. But I've met a lot of women who said, yeah, my boyfriend put me on.
Likewise.
Yeah.
That's common.
What's up with that? Just from your experience in marriage?
I don't know. I really can't say. I know for myself, that was one thing I tried not to do, was to turn people on to drugs, because I knew what it could turn into. And that's not to say that I was perfect, right? But it was just something that was important to me. That even though I used, I wasn't gonna be the person that gave someone their first.
Yeah.
Right.
And salute to you, because even like when you mentioned that story about the woman you worked with, like, yo, that's I know she's not here to defend herself, but that's fact. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah. She was, like I had explained, she was addicted to heroin. I didn't know. And I was like 15. I had my driver's permit. She asked me to drive her. I didn't, and again, right, I didn't know at that time what I was doing. I didn't know she was going through withdrawal in the car. She had me drive her up to, I forget, it was like Spanish Harlem or something like that, to cop. And for her, right, that, and I'm not necessarily making an excuse for her.
No doubt.
But she had a very strong addiction, right? So a lot of times when that's happening, your values and your beliefs go out the window, and it doesn't mean that that's necessarily the person that you are, but using
changes you.
It changes you.
I see what you're saying. So I'm judging by like a sober
Yeah.
principles. Because even like the OGs around me, like they were telling me go to school.
Yeah.
They were telling me stay away from certain things, you know. And so it's just like a totally different world. Yeah, because like the older people around me, they were telling me like, yo, do good. I chose wrong. But you know, so it's crazy for that situation to happen, but I definitely get it.
Yeah. My mother used to always say that I looked like I was possessed when I used to use. She said, you were just such a different person, the change in me. And, you know, things that I would never do sober, I did while using. And, you know, and I mean, I've had pretty heavy consequences. I ended up in the hospital for about a month and a half. I had endocarditis, which is a heart infection. I got that from using IV drugs. And
How old were you?
I had it twice. So the first time that I had it, I was 22, 23. And I was in the hospital for a month and a half, and I was using in the hospital.
Anyway.
Right? So at that time when I was in the hospital, they were giving me like methadone pills, and I would crush that up, and I had an IV, like a PICC line.
Already.
Yeah. And, you know, I just waited for the nurse to drop one of the syringes that she had, and I kept it, and then I was using that, you know, when I was there. I had people coming up, bringing me drugs. And to me, I just looked at it like, I don't have to worry about finding a vein because it's already found for me.
So you ended up in jail. I mean, not in jail, in the hospital because of this addiction or the drug use. And then while in the hospital, you were so heavily like just addicted that you still kept going at it, even though you almost lost your life doing that, right? Or wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost died. They said had I stayed out and not went to the hospital, I would have been dead within a week.
Wow.
You mentioned having a codependent relationship with your ex. Can you tell us what does that mean?
So
How did that affect the situation?
it really did. You know, I was with him for 20 years. And
This is the same ex that introduced you.
so this is my son's father.
Okay.
I have an 18-year-old son. And we were so wrong for each other, but we couldn't see it. It took 20 years to see it. Right? Because he would try to stop, and then I would be the one that would convince him to do it. I would try to stop, and then he would convince me. So we just kept going back and forth, right? And we were like partners in crime because we were also committing crimes together too. So we did, you know, we were theft, whatever you want to, you know, all different, shoplifting. We were doing everything together. We would go to jail together, cop drugs together. You know, it was for years. It was like that.
And as an addict at that time, everything is centered about just getting the next high.
Yeah.
That's all that really mattered.
Right. Yeah. So the day started using, and then the entire day was just figuring out ways to just get more.
When you mentioned that when you first started using at that party, and I got what you said about the desire to belong, because you know, as a child, you feel like you never really fit in, and now here again, you're an outsider observing. You said your life went downhill fast. What does that mean? Your life went downhill fast.
So it started off, I was just maybe a month or so, just socially getting high. And I just couldn't stop chasing it, right? So I had a job. I worked at a bank. At that time, I was in high school. I was in my senior year of high school. And I should have been able to keep that job, but I kept wanting to use. So I, you know, basically put my job on the line to, you know, and I lost it because I got arrested. I couldn't show up. And it's so, I don't know how to explain how it happened so fast, but it did. Right? It happened really fast. And my son's father was incarcerated at one point when I was like maybe 20. And my friend was using intravenously. And she said, this is, you can, it'll hit you quicker. Right? And she said, and you can use less. So he was always against it. So in actuality, I was the one that, though he turned me on to heroin, I was the one that kind of turned him on to using intravenous. Yeah. Because when he got out of jail, he was shocked that, he was gone for a few months and he gets out and I'm like full blown using IV. And it's interesting because I was able to hide quite a bit because I would always get dressed and, make sure that I looked okay, right? So people couldn't tell. But I always had like long sleeves on, like even in the summertime, it would be, so.
Did you manage to keep your weight and everything?
In the beginning, I did. Eventually, it caught up to me, right? Because I was using I was using. And when I was explaining to you how I had endocarditis, my parents, when they went to the hospital, I was in the emergency room when they came in, they walked right past me. They didn't even recognize me because I was already like picking my face and stuff like that. So no matter how much cover up you try to put on, right? I was using a lot of cocaine. I would speedball, which is like when you mix heroin and cocaine. And, the side effects of that, right? I would get paranoid sometimes. I would start to pick my face and they were in total shock at the way that I looked at that point.
How did your lifestyle at the time affect your relationships in terms of friends? Like you spoke on, you met my wife, just so that everybody knows, this is my wife's childhood friend. And my wife is actually the one who suggested that I interview Christina because of her amazing story about hope and just perseverance and resilience. So how did it affect your friendships and even relationships with your siblings and just all around?
It affected every relationship that I had in my life, right? So I was extremely close to your wife. We were best friends, right? For years throughout high school. But once I met my son's father and she saw the change. She didn't necessarily know exactly what was happening, but she knew something was happening. And it was like, I didn't care at that point, right? So I would like shoplift and then ask people, I would be like, can you return this for me and get the cash back, right? I had like every single one of my friends do that, right? And like, she was actually dating somebody at that time and he ended up getting arrested doing that. And, I left, right? But like, it was like, eventually she couldn't be around me anymore, and we lost touch, but it's strange because we kind of like would connect every now and again. And, it's every time I've connected with her, it's like, like that one friend that no matter how long you haven't seen them, right? You could talk to them and just be like, oh my God, I got to tell you everything, like this, and this, and just totally feel comfortable doing it. And she's that person.
She wanted me to ask you, how was the process of mending those relationships?
So a part of me feels like
after recovery,
yeah. But there's one story, and I'll just tell you this one story about how I was already in recovery, right? Before that happened, I had stolen $1,500 from my mother, right? She, kind of was like, oh my God, she like knew that it was gone, the money was gone. And then I was like, trying to help her look for it and stuff. And I blamed it on my son's father because he was in the house. So I said, oh, must have been him. And I think my mother always kind of had that thought that it was me, but she just never said anything. And, you know, when I was in the beginning, when I was clean, she kept asking me, can you just tell me if you took that $1,500? And I kept lying. You know, even though I wasn't using, I lied for a good 1.5, almost 2 years, until eventually I just couldn't lie anymore, right? Because my principles had changed and my values came back, and I felt like I couldn't hold that anymore. So I told her, and I gave her back the money. You know, it was, yeah.
That's an amazing story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she knew, because she said, I'm not shocked. I just wanted you to say it. You know.
I'm sure that meant a lot to her.
Yeah, it did.
When you mention your values, so the values were always there. Mm-hmm. Just when you were using, you became another person, or did you start to develop and adopt new values, or a combination of both?
It's so weird how you kind of said that alter ego. I feel like that was a thing, right? Because I had this ability to be able to shut off certain things in my life. So when I was using, right, I had to shut off the way that feeling bad, all of that. And I would just always justify it in my mind and say, well, you know, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for the drugs. And that's why, you know, it's happening. But I was never like the type of person that, I didn't harm anybody per se, but I robbed them. I would say not physical harm, right? I wouldn't do that. But I was robbing everybody. You couldn't leave your wallet around me. It didn't matter where I was, what I was doing. Even if whether I needed money or not, I'd still rob you just in case. So I have money for later to use.
So as far as mending those relationships, what did that look like? Were you like going back to the people you cared about and apologize?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, that is a part of, you know, I'm a part of Narcotics Anonymous, right? And that is a part of that. I haven't actually reached that step yet to make actual amends, but I still made some amends before that, right? And it's something that is going to happen a little bit more. It'll be a little bit more extensive in the future. I'm not really looking forward to it, but I'm okay with it because it's part of the process, and it's how helps me heal.
Yeah.
When did you start like just changing and finding yourself again, and what made you want to, you know, just clean yourself up?
So I believe, right, had I not been arrested, I would be dead today.
Which arrest?
My last arrest that I had, right?
But was that after, you know, in your bio you mentioned being clean for 10 years and then going back to the needle? Was it that arrest?
It was after that, but so I don't want to say clean, right? I mean, there was a point. So when I found out that I was pregnant with my son, my 18-year-old son, I stopped using and I got on the methadone clinic. But I wasn't willing to stop drinking. Not when I was pregnant, but, you know, after I had my son and everything, that was difficult too, right? Watching my son, because he had to go through withdrawal from the methadone. And that was extremely painful because I knew that he was innocent and that this was a direct result of, you know, of what I've done in my life, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's something, not to cut you off and lose your thought. Mm-hmm. So that's something that you couldn't shut off.
Right.
That guilt.
Right.
This is it. Okay.
And at that time I said to myself, and I had always said, and I was judging people, right? I could never understand a person that has a kid and uses. Right? I said that for years until I was that person. And then I could understand. And I became this person that I never thought I would. You know, like it was always bad, but it's like you don't even see how it gets worse. It just like happens. And I became this person that everything that I said I would never do, I was doing everything and anything. You know, everything was out the window for me in terms of values. Not that they were completely not there, but I had to overlook all that. And so I was, you know, there was that 10-year period, but I, you know, now that I'm in recovery, I wouldn't say that I was clean, because I was still drinking. I would smoke a little marijuana. Mm-hmm. So that the only thing I wasn't doing was using hardcore drugs.
Okay.
So yeah, I was okay for quite a few years. And then it happened like, I went to the dentist or something, and I came out, and I actually, now that I think back, I think I didn't even know it at that point, but I was already setting myself up to say it's okay to go and use. Right? I hadn't used in years. And I said, you know what? I was like, yeah, I don't feel good. And I said, now mind you, I don't have any dealers at this point. I have no contact with anybody because it's been so long, right?
10 years?
It was like, yeah, almost. Yeah, something like that. And I said, I'm going to go out and use, but I was never going to. So once I started using IV, I said, I'll never go back to sniffing, right? So I drove to Newark. I know where the spots are, you know, found the spot that I needed to find it at, and was off to the races day one. After 10 years, I started shooting up again. And it was when sometimes they say, right, like you pick up right where you left off. That's exactly, like, even after 10 years, I still picked up right where I left off. And then I was just, you know, I was like in the beginning, I said, oh, like just once a week, twice a week, 3 times, right? It just kept going up. And the thing that was really painful for me was that I really neglected my son, right? There were times where I would be in the bathroom getting high, you know, and he would be knocking and he'd be like, Mommy, I'm hungry. And I would stay in that bathroom for hours because I couldn't find a vein, because I didn't have veins anymore, right? Like workable veins. They all were like collapsed, you know. So it was very difficult to be able to inject myself, right? So I started injecting in my neck, or in my feet, you know, and it was like this like whole process. And I remember one time, I must have been in the bathroom for like 3 hours, and like my son was like, I'm hungry. And he just stayed by the door so long, he fell asleep. So when I came out of the bathroom, you know, I saw him and he was sleeping, and I felt like, you know, I just felt like a piece of shit at that point. Like I knew that, wow, like this is an all-time low for me, you know, and I could have taken that feeling and switched it, right? But I took that feeling and I dug in a little bit more. Instead of saying I'm going to stop, I took that feeling and I said, so I told myself my son's better off with somebody else. And I said, you know, that was like, it's strange how you can give yourself justification for certain things, you know, and I started justifying it with, he's better off with somebody else, maybe with my sister, my brother, but not with me, you know. And yeah, it was really difficult for me to go through that.
Then what was the spark to recovery?
So I didn't come into recovery on my own free will. Like I was mandated into recovery, more or less, let's say. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you how many times I was arrested by this point. Multiple times. I think I was like, within 1 year, I had 3 felonies, and by like my like third they were just like, wow, like you just keep coming back, like we just keep seeing you here again. And they were right? Like I skated for a while, not skated, but kind of like I never really had like a harsh penalty, like maybe like a year here, 90 days here, different places. I did time in Essex County, I did time in Union County and Middlesex County, right? And this time they wanted to give me jail time because they were like, this girl is just, she's not going to learn, and in the beginning I thought, maybe I'll do jail and, it's not that bad, right? And, but then, so I was, what happened was basically I was put into, at that point it was called drug court. Now it's called recovery court. They did not want to put me into that program, right? Because the prosecutor, they said that I was just a career criminal, right? And they said, no matter what you do, she's never going to get it because look at her track record, right? Look at her. It was like 7 pages front and back, And I remember when she said that, I was like, what? Like, a career criminal? Like that just, it's that like, I don't know. And I was, but I mean, it's when I heard it, and like that was like, so I feel like there was a part of this was my ego, right? Because I just wanted to show her like, you're wrong. I am going to do this. So, they put me onto drug court and I had to go to meetings. That was part of what I had to do. I had, so part of what worked with drug court for me was that because they didn't want to put me on it, they said if I messed up on it, that I was going to have my time and it was going to be consecutive. So that would have been 16 years, right? So that was kind of like the fire, you could say, catalyst to make me, maybe I'm not going to mess up this time. You know what I mean? Because I was like, wow, I don't want to, that's a really long time.
How old was your son at that?
He was like 11 or 12, 12 maybe.
Wow. So he would have came 27?
Yeah. And, I was going to meetings. I had to do 90 meetings in 90 days. I had to get my paper signed. I did that and something stuck. Right?
I love how you just took that energy and just, you channeled it. I think that's an amazing thing. What would you, for the people who are battling with mental health, what words, and I want you to look into your camera, and really speak to them, because there's so many people right now who are on drugs, they're battling with mental health, they're just going through all sorts of stuff, right? What message do you have for them?
I would say that it's okay. And, I watched something recently where it was like a TikTok video where it said that people that struggle with mental health, they do so because they feel on a different level. And I believe that, right? And I believe because that feeling is so strong, that ultimately we end up either using or harming ourselves, and to some capacity. But for myself, I would have always wanted to hear that, and it's okay. It's okay to feel, the way that you feel, and that you will get through it.
At the time when you were going through that life, it seemed like you didn't love yourself. Do you love yourself now?
I do. It's not like it just totally comes back 100%. There are days that my mind tells me, right? And so for me now, I consider it my addiction, right? That my addiction's trying to creep up and tell me like, you're not gonna, like, you're not smart enough, right? You don't belong with these people. Like even though, right, with the 4.0, I still felt like you're not, like, you didn't even deserve that. Like it was like, oh, it was just easy, and it wasn't. But you could tell yourself that, and that's I know today, right, that that's all part of like a core belief that I might have had, as from like even as a child, that is still there that I have to work through. And like I said, so it's kind of like I look at it as the the addiction, right, almost like the angel and the devil on your shoulder, it so for myself now, right, it doesn't come in the form of I want to use, right? It comes in the form of having guilt, right, being impatient, shame is a big one for me. And the same thing, right, I could fit in, but I always feel like I don't, even though I it's not like I don't have friends, right, I do. But there's a part of me that, because I isolated for so many years, that feels very comfortable to me. And I like being there, right? But it's like it's a slippery slope to being it, right? Because, I could stay in there and that could put me in my own head. And it doesn't matter that I have years, right, in recovery.
How many?
I just celebrated 6 years.
Congrats.
Thank you. I'm no better than the person with one day, right? And that's part of what the program teaches us, that it's each day just getting through, I just have multiple days that just built up, right? But it's always kind of being able to stay in the present, because you could start to get cocky, right? And think that like you have it, and that's not the case.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you're choosing not to be in isolation, because you have so much to offer us. You truly are a warrior.
Thank you.
And like strength, beauty, positive energy.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing story that's super. I don't even have the words. Like I keep saying inspiring. I don't know if it's because I lack the vocabulary to describe it. But it's just, it's amazing. Like, I face some challenges in my life, but that's a real challenge.
Yeah.
Battling yourself, battling addiction, your own mind, because it is our own mind that gets in the way most times.
Because it's my own voice that's talking to me, right? That's telling me that something is okay to do, right?
And how are you to shut it up for 6 years?
Because if it doesn't feel right, I don't want to do it, right? So I follow my gut. When I was using, I didn't follow my gut, and I've paid the price for that, for not following my gut, because normally it was right. But, today it's, if it, my values, right, that's like a feeling too. Right? If something doesn't feel right, I'm not participating in it. And that, there are certain things, right, in my life, like honesty, integrity, right? Those are things, those are all extremely important principles, today. Whereas when I was using, they were out the window. There was no integrity because I was robbing you,
Yeah.
But, it's interesting how now that is a big thing for me, right? Like today I could, if I find somebody's wallet, whatever, I'll make sure it gets to them. It's just right.
Yeah.
What role, if any, did spirituality play in your transformation?
So it's interesting that you asked that question, because I was actually just going to say, right, I can't take credit for everything, because so I've never really been that religious, let's say. And I think that was because I was like raised in the Catholic Church, and it was very strict, and I always questioned certain things. And there was a point in my life where I felt like, let's say my higher power, God, right, that he hated me. I felt like, wow, like you really don't like me because I'm going through all of these things in life, And so part of the program, is that spiritual aspect, right? And there's one story that I'll share, which is proof for me, right? My last day using, I was like, I wanted to die at this point, right? And I remember I was going to cop, and I was like crying, like bawling, crying, and I really didn't pray, but I prayed that day, and I said, like, there were so many barriers in my life, right? So like I thought that even if I got clean, I can't get a job because of my record, right? Even if it doesn't matter what I tried to do, like I basically felt like I had ruined my life and I could never get it back again. And I remember I was like praying and I said, like, please, like, let me, I always wanted to go to grad school at Rutgers. That was always a thing. And I always wanted to be in the substance abuse field. And I had prayed, I said, please somehow make that a possibility for me, right? I don't know how that I can be able to be like a productive member of society, right? And not need this every day, because I just didn't want to have to, it was like I was using against my own will at that point. And and I got arrested that night, right? So like it didn't happen necessarily the way that I thought it would, but like that was part of the plan, right? Because if I didn't get arrested, all of this wouldn't have happened, to where I'm at this point now. And I know, right? The fact that I was like, it was almost like I said it, like, putting the words out there, right? And it's like, it manifests itself. But I didn't even know at that time that that's what was going to happen.
And that's what was happening.
It was, right. So, and then I thought like, oh my God, like life's over. I'm getting arrested. I'm going to jail, but I didn't know that was like the start of my story.
So what's next? Let's talk about that.
So I just, I graduated with my master's in social work.
With a GPA of 4.0. You know what I'm saying? We got to add that.
Yeah, my husband's always like, oh, he always says that. And I said, yeah, I think everybody has that. And he's like, no, they don't. Like, what are you even talking about?
Y'all gotta see, we're talking about an addict, someone who was out getting arrested. She's been arrested I'm spitting on myself and everything. She's been arrested so many times, she lost count. Mm-hmm. And she graduated master's with a 4.0 Rutgers from Rutgers University, man. Talking about like, you tell us about it.
So this is fun, right? When I was in the program, I was going to meetings, doing all that. And I met my husband, right? And then I ended up getting pregnant. I have a 4-year-old daughter. And it was like I was going towards like the end of almost finishing drug court, right? And I said, because COVID was starting and I was home, and I said, like, maybe I could do something with this time. So I said, let me just try to apply to a couple of colleges. And I just, in my mind, I kind of said, you're never going to get accepted to Rutgers. That's just not going to happen. So, but I still applied, but I applied to 2 others. So, and it's funny because I didn't get accepted to the other 2, but I got accepted at Rutgers.
Rutgers, wow.
Right, which is the one that I thought I was never going to get accepted to.
And not to cut you, I just want to highlight that real quick. Just the importance, there's a saying, maybe cliche, right? You'll never, help me out, Mac, you'll never make the shot if you don't try.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Thank you. And so the sister took the shot. So for my people out there, even if you think you can't, take the shot. Okay.
You can. You can. And the worst thing that would happen is not doing it, right? Not taking the shot. Because if you think about it, right, let's say that you do and it doesn't happen. You're still in the same place that you were from the beginning. So nothing's really changed, right? It could either, where you could, something could happen. There could be a change.
Yeah.
But I was accepted, and that started my journey. You know, it just kind of kept going, and it's wild. You know, I was always nervous that my record was going to be a problem for me. But once you finish, so part of the, you know, with drug court is if you complete it successfully, they will expunge your entire record. But that's happened, right? But the field that I'm in is also very accepting to people that have struggled with substance use disorder. You know, I remember when I was in rehab, right? And this was part of my drug court journey too, because I was in jail and they said they would release me from jail into a rehab only. And then from the rehab, I was gonna, you know, I would be able to go on the streets, right? But when I was in rehab, I remember one of the workers saying, there are only like 3 or 4 of you that are gonna get it. She said, everybody else, and there was just like, the room was filled, right? And she said, everyone else, you know, there's gonna be people that go back, there's going to be relapses, death, right? Jail. And I remember thinking, like, I have to be a part of that tiny percentage somehow. I just have to, it has to happen. And, you know, it did, right? And like the people that I was like rooming with, you know, unfortunately, they all relapsed. And it's sad, you know, it is sad because I always like see so much potential in people.
Sweet.
But I also know, you know, where they come from too, right? Because like I see the potential, but they don't see it.
You know, just from a bird's eye view perspective, you know, as we start to land the plane, what I see, and I know these are just my words, right? You went through it. Like you went through the fire, you have the scars, the pain, the trauma. Mm-hmm. I'm like, man, I'm listening to you and also listening to what your plans are. And I'm like, you were designed for this. Mm-hmm. It's almost like all of that was for this moment right here, right now. And even like part of what I do as far as like, you know, changing my life coming from the streets, the youth and the young men, they know it's real. It's authentic. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm not, you know, someone who just gonna read this book on urban, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. No, like, yo, I'm from the block for real. Like, go to 10th Avenue, 23rd, mention my name, right? And so I think it's just, you were bred for this. And your strength, like, other people wouldn't be able to handle it. Like it's almost like, for real, like, I'm not trying to talk crazy. Like, you were, like, almost, like, chosen.
Maybe, yeah. It could be, right? I don't, you know, in my job, right, I work at an outpatient detox. I don't disclose to my patients that I'm in recovery, you know, unless it's something that I really see will benefit them in some way. But typically I don't. But I didn't really have to because they went to my supervisor at one point. They were like, I think she's one of us. You know, like they knew, right? Because they said like, you know, like the things that she says in group is like she really understands it differently. Mm-hmm. And you just, right, like I don't have to disclose it, but it's like in their own way, you know.
Something that assisted me with overcoming my addiction to alcohol was I was working out at the time, right? Mm-hmm. I still work out, but I was starting to take working out serious. Mm-hmm. And I remember my man Karim from Jackson Street. I came to the workout one day reeking of alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I forgot what he said, but he made me feel bad, but I'm glad he said it. He said something to the effect of, like, bruh, man, you stink. And he was like, you're never going to see the results you want, bruh. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Because I was literally coming in. I was always, even, you know, like, I don't know, I was still like, even though we were working out in the morning, I'm like, I'm going drunk, sober, like hangover or not. Like, that's just the type of person I am to this day. Like, I'm a man of my word. I'm pulling up. You know what I'm saying? And so I just remember his words and how they made me feel. And I'm grateful, Karim, by the way. And also, I realized that it was affecting my results and that one had to go. And so one of the things, like I always talk about, like things that saved my life, the birth of my daughter is one of them. Mm-hmm. And definitely working out. working out, because it just allowed me to channel, number one, aggression and all of that, but also just overcome those habits, because what came with working out is like a package of some positive habits, right? So do you have like a workout for you necessarily where it supplements, so to speak, that where it's like you had to choose like this or that?
So the gym is one thing, but sometimes I fall off with that, and I feel it when I do. That's definitely true. But it always kind of goes back to the isolation, right? When I start to feel myself isolating a little bit, I know that that's when I have to change something. And, it is connection for me. Because like I don't know if you ever heard this saying, right? The opposite of addiction is connection.
No, I never heard that.
Yeah. And for me, that's exactly what keeps me clean, right? It's what's kept me clean. Being able to connect with other people and understand. So I don't feel like I'm alone. And I talk to people, in my network like every day. I'll share my story, I've done where we'll bring meetings into like hospitals and institutions. I've done that, and it feels good because it keeps things green for me, right? Like when I see somebody that's new, it is I know that pain, right? Like of walking in and I feel it. And normally it's the new person, the one that I'm like, that captures me.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite book or something? We're readers, so we're always promoting reading and whatnot. Do you have like a favorite book or a favorite saying?
So there's one book that I believe is quite good, and there's so many different thoughts on how you're shaped, right? Whether it's like intergenerational like trauma, but there's one, it's called The Body Keeps a Score, and it focuses on veterans, right, with like PTSD, and it like your body basically holds up, right? There's like trauma that you go through, and you remember that. It's like embedded almost into your memory. I wish I will say this, I wish I could. I love to read, but I was being in school, I was like not reading at all because I was like reading so much just to do my schoolwork that so. But I'm gonna be able to get back to. I have so many books too, in my house. Yeah.
I love that.
And it's just it's just so interesting. I feel like everything with this, right? Like just the way that as people, how we, there's always this part that I've come to realize, right? Like the connection I feel with people, it's something that is genuine, right? Because it doesn't, we could be from like totally different walks of life, but there's something that is the same. Do you know what I mean? Like whether it be that pain that you're feeling, just different experiences that you've been through, right? And you can kind of feel that in people. For me, I can. And it's just empathy is a big thing.
Yeah. I find that just in my small perspective, like I would have normally look at somebody like you, right? And where you're from and everything, and just assume that your life is amazing and your life is better than mine. Like I'm talking about back in the day, right? And so I just realized something that connects us all is pain and struggle, some form of it.
Right.
So
it humbles you.
It did. And it makes me realize, like, you know what, like, just like as simple as it sounds, is you never know. You just never know what somebody's going through.
Right. And a big part of that connection is being vulnerable. Because, technically, I feel like culturally, right? It's like, you don't talk about stuff like that, like the way that you feel like you have depression, this and that. Like, that's not even a thing, I will say, right, like even opening up and talking, I still have this like weird, like even doing this, right, I have a weird feeling of like kind of like guilt and shame. And I know that that's tied into, that belief of like, you don't talk about personal things. You don't, that was like a big thing. Right. And I work through it.
Yeah.
No.
I tell you, I bet it was similar just from being a drug dealer and being around my profession and being around certain people. I remember feeling like that as well. And even now, even though like the streets are long behind me, I left the streets alone in 2006. But sometimes like there's this feeling of insecurity, and even it's even like I feel like people are judging me for some reason. Definitely not when I'm like not around my people, but just when I start to step outside of my comfort zone. Right. I start to experience that as well. And I remember like even certain things, feeling ashamed. I started to tell my story a little later because I started to feel ashamed for it. And then it wasn't until I started really telling my story that people were like, yo, you need to speak more. You need to talk about your story more. And I'm like, really? I'm ashamed of that stuff. Yeah. I never had a problem speaking, but about that, I was a little ashamed. Yeah. So yeah, I get it. So even that's interesting. We're on the opposite like ends of it, but we're both experiencing the shame about our past.
Right. There is that. And it's just so interesting how it creeps up on you. How it creeps up and it makes you just feel less than, right? Yeah. Like you don't really like, you don't have a place where, like you don't deserve that spot.
We've worked hard to get where we are.
Right.
So that's and it's that strong in that.
Part of my recovery that's helped me get through, right, is like humor. I have to laugh at a lot of the things that I did because otherwise it would be really difficult to get through. And I'm able to do that today. It's kind of there's still certain things that haven't gone away. Like if I see a cop, I'm always like, oh, like there's a cop there. Like I gotta like always say it, I have to always verbalize that. Definitely. Do you know what I mean? Like just in case you didn't see, like even though we're not doing anything, but
definitely, yeah.
It's like there's certain habits, right? That
for sure, for sure. Yeah.
And I'm a little jaded too. I'm trying to work through that, because it's just like some of those things just come with you, and it's hard to like break it,
Indeed.
It's like you're going through your own PTSD, as you mentioned that book earlier, so those things still resonate sometimes. Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to make sure, as far as like what you're up to, what's next, so you just graduated and so just continuing to serve your community. Is there anything else?
So I'm doing, I'm still working on my LCADC. So I have to do like quite a few more hours to get that certification. And I'm just going to continue to do that, right? Like I just want to keep working in the field, working with people, gaining more experience. Because even though I have this real life experience, right, it's very different from clinical experience.
Indeed.
They're two different aspects. So I always feel I'm comfortable on this side, but it's the other side that I feel like, like I'm not that good, or and I, it's just doing this every day, working with people that struggle, and with the same thing, it helps.
May I suggest something to add to that list? Oh, you gotta write a book. You gotta write a book.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah.
And I'll help you. Just let me know.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, as we start to wrap up, what is something you would like to be remembered for?
I would like to be remembered for my perseverance, right? And determination and resiliency. Because despite going through all the different, experiences that I went through, I was able to make it to the other side. And that's something that I didn't think I could do. Even, right, like this didn't happen at an early age, like it was like 38 I was when I came into recovery.
Wow. Powerful. Another message. It's never too late.
It's never too late. Because that was a big thing too, right? That age. I said, like, everything's over. I'm not going to be able to go back to school. I'm not going to be able to do anything.
Yeah.
And, you know, those are just all lies I was telling myself.
Yeah. Your story even has me thinking about some of the things that I say to myself that it's too late for. Is it really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how you said those are lies that I was telling myself.
Right. Yeah. We tell ourselves those things, and you know, part of that is like we end up using that as like a reason, right? Because we believe it.
Yeah. If you can go back, and I want you to talk to your camera and talk to that 13-year-old little girl that was experiencing depression, about to make some really interesting choices in life, what would you tell her?
I would tell her to, you know, to open up and to tell your story and not have shame or guilt, right? I would tell that person, you know, you can get through it, and to believe in yourself, right? And that you're worthy.
Christina, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Tell a friend to tell a friend, subscribe, share. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Peace and power.